Every morning, she pulled up at exactly the same time, drove exactly the same route, at exactly the same careful pace. The kids had a nickname for her, Slow Maggie. Parents complained. Students rolled their eyes. Nobody ever asked her to explain herself. What none of them knew was that 20 years earlier, on a bridge in the middle of a blizzard, Margaret Wilson had done something most drivers never have to face in an entire lifetime. And every single one of the 47 children on her bus made it home because of it. This is the story of the day Millfield finally found out why Slow Maggie never once apologized for how carefully she drove. Margaret Wilson was 71 years old, a widow for the last 8 years, and for 15 of those years, she had driven Bus 12 on the same Maple Grove Elementary route, 5 days a week, rain or shine. The kids called her Slow Maggie, not always unkindly, but not kindly either. She drove exactly the speed limit, sometimes a few miles under, coasted gently into every stop sign instead of riding the brakes, and waited a full extra beat at every crosswalk, even when it looked empty. "Why are we always late?" a boy near the back complained one afternoon, loud enough for the whole bus to hear. "She's slower than Google Maps," his friend added, and a few kids laughed. Margaret's eyes flicked to the mirror for half a second. Then she kept driving, exactly the same speed as before. She'd been told, more than once, that she could save 4 or 5 minutes a day if she rode the yellow lights a little closer, coasted through empty crosswalks a little faster. She always said the same thing, "I'll get there when I get there," safely. Nobody ever asked her why that mattered so much to her. One parent, a woman named Denise Carver, whose son rode Bus 12 every morning, finally sent an email to the school district. "I understand safety matters, but 15 minutes late every single day is unacceptable. Perhaps it's time to consider a driver who can actually keep pace with the schedule." The district didn't reassign her, but the email got forwarded, quietly, to a few other parents, and the nickname stuck harder after that. Some mornings, kids waiting at the stop would time her with their phones, just to see how far behind schedule she'd fall, treating it like a running joke passed down between grades. Only one student, a quiet second grader named Oliver who always sat in the front row, ever said "Thank you, Miss Margaret," when he stepped off the bus. She always said, "You're welcome, sweetheart," right back, and for a few seconds each afternoon, that was enough. At home, in a small house at the end of Birch Street, Margaret kept a single framed photograph on her mantel, a school bus, decades old, parked in front of a building that no longer existed in any town she'd lived in since. She dusted the frame every week. She never explained it to anyone who asked, and after a while, nobody asked anymore. Until the Tuesday, a storm rolled in, and the rain on Route 9 turned out to matter more than anyone expected. It was a Tuesday in late October, rain coming down in sheets since early morning, the kind of storm that turned every intersection into a hazard. Margaret approached the corner of Route 9 and Birch, same as always, easing the bus down to a careful stop well before the crosswalk. That was the only reason what happened next didn't end in tragedy. A sedan came through the intersection from the cross street, hydroplaning on the wet asphalt, completely out of control, sliding directly toward the side of the bus where 23 children sat in their seats. For most drivers, there wouldn't have been time to think. Margaret didn't think. She reacted. In one motion, she released the brake and eased the bus forward exactly 4 feet, just enough to open a gap, while simultaneously laying on the horn to warn the sedan's driver and pulling the wheel a precise few degrees to angle the bus's frame away from direct impact. The sedan clipped the very back corner of the bus's bumper, spun once, and came to rest harmlessly in the grass median. Nobody in either vehicle was hurt. Not one child on that bus even lost their seat. In the back row, a 13-year-old boy who'd never once thought about his bus driver's driving turned to his friend and said, quiet enough that only she heard, "Did you see that? She barely even looked." Officer Diane Ramos arrived within minutes, took one look at the skid marks, the bus's exact position, and the undamaged children filing calmly off to be checked over, and turned to her partner with a question she couldn't quite answer herself. How did she react that fast? Officer Ramos asked. That's not reflex. That's training. Paramedics checked every child individually before letting them board a replacement bus. Not one bruise, not one raised heart rate beyond the ordinary excitement of the moment. 23 kids walked away from what should have been, by any reasonable estimate, a serious collision. Margaret just stood by the open bus door, arms crossed against the rain, insisting she was fine, insisting everyone check on the kids first, deflecting every question about herself. Word of what happened spread through Millfield by dinner time. But nobody, not even Officer Ramos, knew the half of what they were actually looking at. Renee Castillo, a fifth-grade teacher who'd watched the whole thing unfold from the school's front window, couldn't stop thinking about Officer Ramos's question. She started asking around the district office, quietly, mostly out of curiosity, for a piece she wanted to write for the school newsletter. Margaret's personnel file was thin. Hire date, license renewals, a clean record, nothing unusual. Then Renee called the State Department of Education's Transportation Division, hoping someone there might know something about advanced driver training programs Margaret might have taken. The woman who answered the phone went quiet for a moment when she heard the name. Margaret Wilson, she repeated slowly. Wait, is this the Margaret Wilson? She used to run our statewide certification program. One of the best transportation safety instructors this state ever had. Trained probably 400 drivers before she stepped back. Renee sat up straighter. She trained drivers. I had no idea. That's not even the part people remember her for, the woman said, her voice shifting into something quieter, more careful. You really don't know. Renee didn't. There was a long pause on the line. You should look up the Route 9 bridge incident, the woman finally said. 20 years back, different district, few hours north of you. It's not really public record anymore. The file's old. But ask around up there. Ask about the bus with 47 kids on it. Renee wrote the words down slowly. Route 9 bridge. 47 kids. She had no idea yet just how much weight those two details were about to carry. What Renee eventually pieced together, through old newspaper archives, a retired district superintendent willing to talk, and finally, a short phone call with Margaret herself, who spoke about it for the first time in years, was this. 20 years earlier, in a different school district 4 hours north, Margaret Wilson was driving Bus 6 home through an early, unexpected blizzard. Visibility had dropped to almost nothing. The roads department hadn't gotten to the bridge on Route 9 yet, and black ice had formed beneath a thin layer of fresh snow, invisible until it was too late. As Margaret's bus crossed the bridge, the rear wheels lost traction entirely. The bus began sliding, slowly at first, then faster, toward the guardrail on the downhill side, the drop below hidden by whiteout snow. Margaret didn't panic. She'd trained other drivers for this exact scenario more times than she could count, and now, for the first time, she had to live inside her own training. She steered into the slide, rather than against it, easing off the brake to let the tires find friction again, and managed to bring the bus to a stop just short of the guardrail, but at a steep, unstable angle, one wheel already partially off the shoulder, the metal rail groaning audibly under the weight. The bus wasn't safe. Not yet. Not with 47 children still inside, and zero visibility for anyone else crossing that bridge behind them. Margaret stood, and in a voice she'd use in 100 training sessions but never once for real, gave the calmest instructions of her life. Oldest kids first. Hold the hand of the child behind you. Single file. Stay low. Walk. Don't run. To the far side of the bridge, where two teachers on a following bus were already forming a human chain to receive them. She counted them as they crossed, out loud, under her breath, the way she'd once taught other drivers to do in emergency drills nobody expected them to ever actually need. 11, 12, 13. She didn't stop counting until she reached 47. 47 children, one at a time, in a blizzard, on a bridge that was actively cracking under a bus that might slide the rest of the way over at any moment. It took 11 minutes. Every single child made it across safely. Margaret was the last one off. The bus shifted further only after the final child's hand let go of the rail, As if, some said later, it had simply been waiting for her. The story made the local paper for exactly 2 days. There were no dramatic photos. The wreckage had already been cleared by the time reporters arrived, and nobody had been hurt, which meant, in the strange math of local news, there wasn't much of a story left to tell. For months afterward, Margaret couldn't cross a bridge in bad weather without her hands tightening on an imaginary wheel, even as a passenger. Margaret asked for a quiet transfer 6 months later. 2 years after that, she left the district entirely, eventually settling in Millfield, where nobody knew her name, her training, or what she'd carried across that bridge. She never asked to be forgotten. She just never corrected anyone who assumed she was ordinary. Renee published the story in the school newsletter that Friday, though within days it had spread far past Maple Grove Elementary. A local news station picked it up by the following week. Denise Carver, the parent who'd once emailed the district complaining about Margaret's pace, read the article twice before she said anything to anyone. "I used to think she drove too slowly," Denise told a reporter who came to interview a few parents outside the school. "Now I realize she drove carefully. There's a difference, and I completely missed it." Denise wasn't alone. Parents who'd forwarded that original complaint email started quietly reaching out to the district office, asking, almost sheepishly, if there was some way to apologize. The boy who'd called Margaret slower than Google Maps found her at the bus stop the following Monday, hands in his pockets, and simply said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "You didn't know because I never told you," Margaret said. "That's not your fault." Kids at the bus stop stopped timing her with their phones. A few started waving when they saw the bus turn the corner, well before it even reached the stop. Even Officer Ramos stopped by one afternoon, off duty, just to shake Margaret's hand and admit she'd been quietly researching bus safety training ever since that rainy Tuesday. Never guessing the answer to her own question, had been driving the same route for 15 years. The State Transportation Board, hearing about the renewed attention, reached out to formally recognize her 20-year-old training record, the one she'd built her entire evacuation procedure from, the one that had just saved lives twice, on the very same bus route.